The purpose of this presentation is really to highlight the key pillars of the new investment law. But before doing so, we would like to share insights of, first, why did we come up with the idea of a new investment law? There were numerous debates happening at all levels with investors at the Parliament. Everyone was calling for a new investment law. Our vision has been in line with these calls because that vision that was adopted in August of 2016 believed that a new investment law is essentially required to deal with the challenges that Egypt is encountering with its new vision. The economic reform plan, the strategy for sustainability 2030, all these were produced post the amendments that happened to the investment law in March of 2015. Therefore, a new investment law was required, but we did not rely on these factors only. We've listened carefully to investors. We've conducted surveys, listened to their challenges, requirements, and interpretations or difficulty in understanding provisions of the previously amended law. Before coming up with our strategy or map of challenges that we need to tackle under the new investment law, a law that does not deal with the current challenges and does not have a forward-looking approach for matching the economic needs of the country is not a sufficient law. And that's why this new investment law is in line with Egypt's sustainable development plan, sets in it the principles of investment that are in line with sustainable development and inclusive growth, that set provisions that clearly state that all government officials are required to ease procedures of investors as one of their key performance indicators that hold their accountability and that set their incentive packages. Therefore, this new law is built on a fresh philosophy targeting ease of doing business, targeting incentive program, a temporary incentive program that attracts certain sectors in certain areas. The new investment law came to tackle also, as I mentioned, challenges in the previous law, such as shortage in certain provisions, such as challenges in reading certain provisions with full enforceability impacts on the ground, such as challenges relating to the key process challenge known previously as the one-stop shop. The philosophy of the one-stop shop that has been accumulated over the previous years has been built in a way that seems to provide that GAFI will replace all other government entities. This is an impossible approach. It does not happen anywhere in the world. That's why the philosophy has been changed in this new investment law. The references of this law are numerous. We've looked at comparative different legislations. We've looked at World Bank international principles for doing business and competitiveness, comments on the previous law. We've looked at UNCTAD principles for investment regimes. We've looked at our own vision as Egypt, because one of the key challenges that we encounter all the time is that what academia provides sometimes does not have a practical implementation tool to deal with certain challenges on the ground. And I'll give you an example. Some of the international best practices propose that an investment law should be dealing with incentives and guarantees only, and not deal with issues such as land allocation, ease of process, setting up of companies, and so forth. That is academically a very sharp approach. But practically, through the historical record of the development of investment laws of Egypt, is impossible to implement. Otherwise, there will be a an absent set of provisions to deal with these aspects that is historically developed under the investment law. So this law was perceived by some critics as quite a long law in terms of size, but we've always argued that size does not really count. What really counts is the content of the law, the transparency and confrontation of dealing with the issues that investors encounter and their challenges, to the extent it is possible to deal with these issues under a legal text. Because one of our key answers to typically asked question, is the law going to cure all challenges of investment in Egypt? The law is one of the tools as part of the legislative reform plan for investment climate, but there are other pillars that are important, such as administrative, institutional reform, and procedural reform, like what we have undertaken in GAFI to ease general meeting procedures, for example, like activating provisions of land allocation that we've managed to successfully implement since last June, and today we have allocated over 800 plots throughout Egypt, using the new system transplanted in amendments of law 17 of 2015. Our philosophy in this law and in its implementation is to build on what was achieved by GAFI and all previous constituencies and take it to the next level. It is not to abolish what has been successfully achieved, such as the land allocation process. That's why this law includes the parts which were positive of the previous regimes, but adds novel and revolutionary aspects dealing with licensing and approval procedures, as we will highlight. The key challenges that we had to address in this law is activating the one-stop shop in a fashion that really works on the ground. So we had to set provisions to deal with that. We had to include an incentive, a temporary incentive program to attract investments that Egypt is targeting according to its vision, to increase the level of production and to increase the level of exportation whilst reducing the level of importation. Enhancing dispute settlement, improving our promotion capabilities and investors' access to investment opportunities through a well-crafted investment map that strategically reflects the competitive advantage of investment opportunities throughout Egypt. So when we offer an investment opportunity in a southern part of Egypt in Minya Governorate, we propose, for example, a plastic manufacturing factory because there are competitive advantages in this jurisdiction due to geography, due to other industries surrounding this area, as by way of example. Due to all these challenges, this new law came up with three main pillars that were addressed. The first pillar, and the most important one, was facilitating and providing ease measures for doing business in Egypt. Ease measures in terms of obtaining investment approvals, in terms of dispute settlement, and in terms of tackling the one-stop shop historical challenges through enforceability provisions that make it work on the ground. Strengthening the guarantees awarded to investors and curing challenges in the previous law by taking guarantees to best international practice and dealing with the enforceability provisions and the challenges that were embedded in the previous law. As well as the third component being providing a temporary incentive package in certain designated areas and sectors based on a distinction that we will highlight when tackling that pillar. What are the key guarantees? The typical guarantees that investors seek per best international practice: the right of repatriation of dividends, the protection against expropriation, protection against administrative decisions that add burdens or financial liabilities without a full, precise approval process that takes that process up to the highest level at the government. The right of obtaining information to support transparency, right and regulating use of foreign employees for activities that require certain expertise that might not be available in the local market. The typical guarantees that give investors the comfort. These guarantees are tied to what has been happening on the economic reform plan, what has been happening post the flotation of the Egyptian pound. So when we say we've seen the governor of the central bank announce the strength of Egypt's positioning post the flotation, so this law takes the legislative measures to give that comfort, which is happening and progressing on the ground. New incentives package in the law. So how did we look at these incentive package? Whilst there is jurisprudence and academia calling for abolishing any tax-related incentives, proposing that these incentives are no longer tools to attract investment. That's academically, from a strictly theoretical point of view, correct, but when looking on the ground and looking at comparative legislations, many legislations provide incentives. Incentives are used to attract investments, especially in certain economic conditions and when there is need of developing certain sectors and certain areas. And therefore, the new law sets a redemption right for investors from their investment cost up to 50% in areas more in need of development in the sectors designated in the law. And these sectors are industrial, electricity production and distribution, education, all sectors that are required as part of Egypt's strategic plan and vision. And these sectors are also designated in two folds. Areas more in need of development will get a 50% incentive, while other areas in Egypt will get a 30%. Technological hubs as well will enjoy these incentives. And if you look at the sectors, these are based on careful analysis with the Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Technology, and Ministry of Finance to ensure that we preserve Egypt's income from taxes, but at the same time provide measurable and felt incentives in the sectors that we are seeking to develop. How does the incentive work? Simply, if you've invested 100 million in certain sectors in Zone A, which is areas more in need of development, you get a redemption of 50 million that you can deduct from your tax base over 7 years, up to 80% of your equity. This incentive program is its eligibility period is 3 years and can be renewed for another 3 years. And it is a very focused program at these sectors and seeks potential renewal of the program if decided by the government after 3 years. And some people confuse between the 3 years and the 7 years. The 3 years is the time for eligibility for applying for the program post issuance of the law, while the 7 years is the time where the redemption is permissible to apply. One of the key conditions for the incentives as well is that all the components of the business have to be fresh, a new company, fresh assets injected into the business to ensure that who is awarded the incentive is a new business coming in the sectors that are targeted. Facilitating investment and the Investment Services Center, where we adopted a new philosophy tied into several components. The first component is guidelines that are precise and approved by all government authorities that guide the process and documentation for approval process. One of the challenges of investment procedures was the confusion between the 3 layers of approvals. Any investor seeking to do business comes to set up their company as a first step, seeks allocation of a land to get the project launched on, and seeks regulatory licensing and approvals to operate the business. These three folds have been divided, and their challenges have been divided in the new law, and we've tackled each one. If we look at the incorporation process, it's unified, consolidated with GAFI, now automated. Yesterday, per the new automated system that has been hosted and supported by the Ministry of Telecommunication, jointly with Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation, this protocol that we've activated in August, we've managed yesterday to establish 20 companies using the new technology that has been adopted by a few of the best companies in the world in technology of online registration. And the testing process will continue, and it will be launched officially quite soon. And the law takes this automated process into full enforceability of documentation, online signatures, to facilitate its enforceability machinery going forward to the full impact per provisions of the law. The second layer is land allocation. That was introduced by Law 17. We've added enforceability provisions to assist pricing of the lands in a competitive way, timelines for approval of allocation process, and GAFI's role, that is not ownership of the land, but GAFI's role is really to facilitate promoting the investment opportunities with the different owners of the land, being governorates or different entities, as well as ratification of the allocation process per the procedures outlined in the law. Licensing procedures through the guidelines, through specific deadlines mandated by the law, is quite precise in the law, well crafted, to allow investors to assess their regulatory costs before injecting their investments into the country. And this certainty is quite important for investors, and we make sure that the provisions of the law provide that certainty when investors read licensing procedures. What is different? Again, all this plus specific deadlines, where we say that the licensing process must be consummated within 60 days. If the investor does not receive an approval within 60 days or no response, then it is a deemed approval by law that is issued per admissible, enforceable certificate. Therefore, this whole process in terms of the Investment Services Center does not deactivate any technical powers of any of the authorities, but joins these authorities with GAFI in a unified, consolidated process tied to specific deadlines, tied to specific guidelines, and tied to an ease process that all constituencies are required to honor per provisions of the law. We've also added an additional optional layer of approval support, being ratification offices, where investors can seek a pre-approval process with ratification offices that will be admitted by GAFI within 10 days if these certificates meet the requirements, with certain very precise approval procedures and very precise registration and admission procedures for these ratification offices to ensure their quality, to ensure their honoring of liability, and gives investors an additional layer to support the licensing process. So the bottom line in terms of the Investment Services Center and dealing with the challenges of the one-stop shop is that, again, we've divided each layer of challenge and dealt with that layer through different timelines, through different procedures, clearly and explicitly stated within the law. Investment opportunities and investors' access to investment that takes investors through a strategic approach in seeing the investment opportunities in Egypt, and the Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation is working on developing that investment map. So all these investment opportunities will be gathered on that map, available easily through high-end technology available to investors, and all entities owning the lands will be mandated to secure providing the investment opportunities onto this map that will be managed by the ministry in support by GAFI. Throughout the provisions of that law, synchronization of process was one of the important pillars, and therefore there were several tools to do that, again, as I mentioned, through timelines, through the very crucial role of the Supreme Investment Council that was reinstated as part of the law, through offering different investment dispute settlement opportunities as alternatives for investors. All these synchronization provisions facilitate the process for investors and provide easy access to each item of these components, each item of these processes, as well as setting all that tied to deadlines and specific time frames that approvals will be obtained within. Again, I would like to reiterate that the philosophy of this law, if we would like to highlight it in 2 points, it is based on, first of all, that the original approach of all constituencies and government officials is to facilitate procedures for investors and expedite their process. That is now an obligation on all of us and all constituencies dealing with investors. This philosophy is a dramatic change because, according to this provision, it is an enabling provision to conduct a very effective administrative reform that is tied to incentive programs for government staff that is directed on concluding and admitting the procedures provided they meet the requirements of the law. So now we are all mandated to look for the easiest and shortest way to allow investor access to their investment procedures. And also another point, which is separating organizing investment from regulating investment. Historically, GAFI has been mandated with too many roles: promoter of investors, investment in Egypt, regulator of companies, and organizer of investment in Egypt. What is the distinction between organizing and regulation? Organizing is entrance or exit. So an investor comes, wants to set up a company, wants to obtain approval on general meetings. So we worked on that on the ground before issuance of the law, because at GAFI we had a very clear approach that whatever we can change and we have the authority and administrative decree power to issue, we will issue and not wait for the law. And this is what we did, as you all know, in terms of general meeting ratification process, where we shifted the process from taking weeks and months in some instances to the same day. Also valuation process at the Economic Performance Committee, and activating the land allocation process, which took us from a balance of 0 to 805 plots since June of last year in the past 11 months. So all these components we've worked on before issuing the law. But when the law came in power, it gave the enforceability provisions that give and take these aspects to the next level. So distinguishing between organizing investment and then regulating investors at a later stage through very precise review mechanisms to ensure that any breaches of governance requirements or legal requirements are taken actions in terms of regulatory actions once a proper review is conducted at the proper channel. So separating the function of regulating from organizing investment allows us to give investors speedy access to their investment, yet regulate any breaches or governance malpractices. One of the things that have been reproduced in the investment law is the return of private free zones through special requirements that will be approved by the cabinet to ensure that these special free zones achieve the economic targets that they are designed for. The law introduced technological zones because Egypt is seeking to develop its technological manufacturing and development capabilities in IT sectors. And these hubs will be inspirational for development and enjoy facilitation of the law. One structural issue I would like to highlight about the law that is sometimes misperceived. The law was very keen on ensuring that all incentives and procedural ease and legal positioning of entities established before the law is well maintained and protected. But the additional layers of the law, these entities will also enjoy, save for the temporary incentive program that is eligible for certain sectors with certain requirements which we explain. So there is no challenge in terms of companies asking what would be my position now that the new law has been produced. Your position is better because you take on board all ease measures and non-incentives provisions in the law, and you are protected by the structure designed in the law. And going forward, any investor in Egypt will enjoy these benefits, but the exception in all this is the special incentive program, which has certain requirements that not all companies will enjoy. They will only enjoy it based on the eligibility requirements stated in the law. Last point is the dispute settlement mechanism. We've upgraded the mechanism. We've made sure that dispute settlement committees have full enforceability to their decisions, similar to court orders. These committees will facilitate dealing with different disputes, whether it's contracts reaching the balance equilibrium of these contracts if it's impacted, whether it's the ministerial committee that looks at disputes between investors and different government entities. All these factors have been dealt with in the law to synchronize the process and expedite it further and give it its full enforceability. On top of the grievance committee that is presided by one of the councillors from the judiciary to review any procedures and objections from procedures under the investment law. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this with you. And معلش